Welcome back, everyone. We're on to the audience submitted questions portion of the panel. We got a huge stack, so I think we're gonna be able to get through about maybe 3 of them. And the same rules apply as before. Try to step up, step back, all the wonderful cliches. So first audience question. What type of impact do you think having a woman of color as the new superintendent, for those who don't know, Dr. Laura De La Cruz, will have on our Lake Oswego School District schools?
For one, I think it'll mean everything to me and everyone up here. Just having someone on the school that's administration that looks like you, because at the moment the entire administration is mainly white, and that's incredibly problematic because those people while they're very capable people and do a wonderful job, they don't have the experiences that a person of color has. They don't have that emotional connection to it that they can push through their legislation or whatever their work. And just having someone who's gone through something that someone who's gone through the things that people at the bottom go through, they kind of speak for the people and speak for what the town needs instead of, because to be honest, having a white person talk to lecture Lake Oswego and to make the rules or whatever, they're only thinking from their own perspective, and they're not thinking from mine. And that just continues Lake Oswego's problems. It just makes things worse for students like me. So in the future, I think it'll set the Lake Oswego onto a new standard and push the town forward into a better direction.
I'll just go first. Okay. So, as someone who's had a one-on-one session with Dr. De La Cruz, I am so excited that she's coming to be the superintendent of our district. She is amazing. If you've had the opportunity to talk to her, her energy and her commitment to this district is so encouraging and honestly extremely motivating. I had this one-on-one session with her where she essentially just asked me a bunch of questions about what I perceive and my experience in the district and on the school board. And I had a really wonderful time talking to her. To see her at our meeting, to see her becoming already actively engaged in our community is amazing. And the fact that she's a woman and that I can see myself in her and that she's a person of color, it moves me, honestly, and that's pretty much all I have to say. She's incredible, and I think everyone that has talked to her, that has interacted with her, can also speak to that, and hopefully you guys can all talk to her soon.
So I can speak to this in 2 different avenues, one as a student and one as somebody who works on the DEI council. She's been at every meeting that she could. She's come to everything related to diversity, and she's looked in every one of our eyes and told us she has a commitment to that. And that, on one level, not even being a student, is exceptional to hear from any sort of adult in this community that has a position of power in our educational district. And from a perspective as a student, I know you guys are probably all sick of my stories by now, but I have one more. So in 8th grade, I decided I wanted to run for class president. And we had never had anybody but a white male class president before that point. And thanks to Slim Hudson, who graduated just recently, we did have somebody, but it wasn't me. My year, I got multiple people coming up to me and saying I couldn't be class president because I wasn't representative of our student body. And as a woman minority, there was no way I could help guide anything that the students needed because I could not understand what the students needed. And to that I say, look at our superintendent now. Those same students are now going to get used to having a woman and minority in a position of power who has a voice and who can stand there and say, I'm going to champion these things that once maybe this district didn't take as importantly as it does now. So from that aspect, to every young kindergarten girl coming in who is a woman and a minority, or just a minority or just somebody who's never seen someone in a position of power, I want to say thank you to the school board, thank you to this district, and thank you to all of you for never letting go of that importance to us and fighting for that same mission forever.
So, second audience submitted question, do you feel like you have support from students who are not of your race, and do you feel like someone has your back?
I'd say that's a difficult question. I'd say yes and no. My friends, I feel they're friends with me, and so they care about me and they care about the things that I go through on a daily basis. But for people there's a lot of people in the Lake Oswego School District who have no friends of color, no experience to anything that's different than themselves. So they don't really care. They don't have that empathy that is so needed to actually do this work. The one problem that I find in this community is the lack of empathy. People do not care about people who are other than themselves. And the only way that can be solved is by forming relationships with people who are different than you. Because then you'll understand them, and they're your friend, and you'll care for them almost as much as you care for yourself. And so I'm lucky enough to have really great friends. But there's also lots of learning moments that you have. So I remember 7th grade, I moved here in 7th grade, and I knew nobody. And I had no friends for basically a year. And especially for someone who's not so socially outgoing and talks to everyone, it's incredibly hard to get into those cliques in Lake Oswego. So I had one friend, and I was kind of starting to find my people in the school. And I have this one friend, and she's really close. She's a really close friend to me. But we had this experience where we were sitting at lunch, and she told me, like, she was saying, like, I don't understand why all these people are blaming all white people and claiming that they're all racist and that all white people are bad. And at that time, I really didn't know a lot about race and concerns, but I knew that hurt me because I just had this sudden realization that this friend that I thought she didn't understand, like she was taking a side to all the people at the school who I felt were on the other side. And while there was someone right next to me who held these beliefs that she thinks that people of color are all just demonizing the white society instead of saying that it's all someone else's fault, that she's not racist, but it's someone else. So why are you blaming me for being white, basically? And I remember I stormed. I didn't say anything. I just stormed off and I cried for a little while. And then she started crying because, of course, everyone's crying. And but then I kind of told her, I had that moment where I kind of told her how much that hurt me, having her kind of say those things to me because she doesn't understand. And she would have never known something like that if she hadn't been friends with me. She would have never, there's probably people who go through life not ever learning or thinking about how something that they do affects other people of different races because they don't have that perspective. And so just because we are a bubble, it is a majority white community, these people don't have the ability to educate themselves properly and to have that empathy which is needed to care for other people and just love everyone instead of all the complications.
I agree with Maya in the sense that there's a yes and a no, because I feel that I surround myself with people who think similarly to me and believe the same things that I do. So all those people obviously care about what I care about, and they support me, so they care about what I care about. But then there's also the other side. So I'm co-president of our school's Black Student Union, and last year when we were talking, I was like, oh yeah, like our BSU, we're gonna go do this like Black Student Summit, like it's gonna be so much fun, like I'm so excited. And then someone was like, well, why are you doing this? Like, why do you have a BSU? Like, we're all one student body. Why do you need a Black student union? And I was like, trying to explain to them, I was like, well, there's such a small portion of our student body that feels like left out because there's like 10 of us at this school. So BSU is a place where we can feel like we belong. We all feel like we're together there. And they're like, well, yeah, but that just like separates you from the rest of the student body. And I was like, it's not, I was like, it's less of a separation and more so that this is a place where we're together. We're not leaving anyone out. This is a group of people that has come together. And so I think that there are those people who don't support us, but I think overall people like to see change in our schools and people want to make things better. And in this age especially, I think people are more open to equality and like making sure that everyone's voice is heard and that everyone feels like they have a place. So I do think that for the most part, everyone is supported and stuff like that, but also there are always going to be naysayers, and there's always going to be people who don't believe what you believe and who like to think in negatives instead of positives. So I think we more so have to look at the people who do believe in us, and those people are in a majority. So to focus on those people. Yeah.
Would it be okay if okay, thanks. So I know it seems a little weird why I'm speaking to this question, but I just wanted to speak to the white people in the room, and especially to the white students. I don't see a whole lot of you there, but considering that this is on video, hopefully they'll take some time to watch. I just wanted to pose a question, like, how can we, as white people, be better allies? How can we be better friends? How can we support our friends and community of color more? Clearly, this is an issue that is not exclusive to communities of color. This is a community issue, and it's something that we all hold a stake in. And this isn't something that we can just shy away from. I think if I could even like conceptualize of me just ignoring this issue, especially considering that I have several friends who are students of color or who are people of color, if I were to just shy away from this issue, like that would make me sick to know that that they struggle with this and that I am not being there for them. So I'm just gonna pose the question, and hopefully when you're going home tonight, and hopefully when you're just spending time with other people every day, which is, you know, just everyday life, this is always in the back of your mind. Just in general, I mean, not even pertaining to the issue of racism, but we're here today because of racism. How can we be better allies? How can we be better friends? And how can we be more supportive? How can we show our love and support and say, I am there for you? Tell me what happened to you. I'm here to listen. How can I help? And leave it open.
So thank you for that. So I think we've heard a lot tonight, and hopefully this has helped open some people's eyes, get people thinking not just about, you know, the issues that happen in the schools, but the possibilities of things we can do, and maybe some of the solutions and opportunities that we're not thinking about that, as some of these students have laid out tonight, are right there for us to take on. Now, one of the things that, you know, has kind of rankled me in recent weeks just listening to, you know, just random conversations we've had is that even now, like, you've listened to these students tonight, yet we still have people in positions of real power in the city, elected officials, educators, police officers, et cetera, who will tell you and very aggressively tell you that racism still isn't a problem in this town. And excuse me for once again editorializing a little bit, but I think that's preposterous and shameful. And that said, if we can't count on them to serve the needs of all members of this community, then that responsibility falls back on us. And with that in mind, I have one last question that I want to open up for everyone on the panel, which is, what is it you think that adults in this community are most unaware of when it comes to racism in schools? And how can we better support you as concerned community members?
Okay, I'll just start. And can you repeat that one last time? I want to make sure.
No problem. So, what is the thing you think adults in this community are most unaware of when it comes to racism in schools? And how can we better support you as concerned community members?
Okay. Wow. Okay. I honestly think that when we think of racism, it's very difficult for us to picture racism in our own lives, to picture racism in our own communities. And when we're talking about racism, two words have come up, institutionalized racism and microaggressions. And I think that feels like two extremes. Like, we have institutional racism, and I think of like the school to prison pipeline. I think of that, and I think of that as like a really widespread, like, national issue. And then I think about microaggressions, which can just be like one-on-one. And I think what we need to remember here is that it's not those two seeming extremes, that there's much more to the issue of racism. And what I want to speak to in just these few minutes is education and how it's critical to solving this issue. And I mean, I'm using the word solving, and it's not even doing it justice. It's how we can even begin to address this issue, because it's so deeply rooted in education. And I was reading an article from Vox the other day, and it was discussing how we teach slavery, which surprisingly enough is not taught very effectively. It seems to me pretty ridiculous, but we don't have any sort of standard about the way that we teach slavery. And so when I'm thinking about this in terms of schools, and in terms of our curriculum, I'm thinking about the ways that we can not just say to students, like, here's what happened, but it's how we can integrate this into our English classes, how we can learn from primary sources, how we can hear the stories, how we can tie that into our history curriculum, how we can tie that into our creative classes and tie that into art projects. And when I think about racism and I think about teaching the history of racism in our country, we have to see that reflected in a series of mediums. I'm an art student, and I know that one of the most effective ways to appeal to people emotionally and mentally is through art. If we focus on racism through art, if we focus on racism through history curriculum, if we focus on racism through English, through every single subject, aside from maybe math, but we have statistics, then we can more effectively begin to address this issue. So I'm sort of going to leave it at that.
I think for me, one of the ways that I've seen most effectively to like educate, because I think, again, education is one of the biggest ways that you can combat the issue of racism, because a lot of it just stems from ignorance, is one, implementing more like comprehensive talk about racism in schools, especially at a young age, because I know personally, like, being a Black woman in America, like, there's a lot of things that I needed to know before the rest of my classmates needed to know, just because I'm Black and they're white. So there was a lot of things like the history of the N-word and why that's not a good word when people call you that, because some girl called me that. And I was like, Mom, what does this mean? And she was like, okay. So we had to talk about that, and just like little things like that where it's like you need to speak about it, because then people start using that word and don't know the history of it, and then they're just like, well, how was I supposed to know? No one ever taught me. And then another way I think also is open and honest discussions, because a lot of times in classroom settings especially, people feel afraid to ask like dumb questions, I guess, just because they don't know. So they don't want to seem stupid or like that they don't know the answers, so they just don't ask and then they just assume things. So I know personally, like I get a lot of questions from my friends when they're just genuinely curious about things. Like I talked about cultural appropriation with one of my friends recently, and she was just like, I don't get it. Like, what is it? And so it was the process of explaining and then just like education, really. So I think that we just need to have more education. To kind of speak to Penelope's point, just education is really important, and just open and honest discussions, because if people don't feel like they have a chance to speak, then they never will.
I think the thing a lot of adults are either unaware of or apathetic to is how these, we talked a lot about microaggressions tonight and how, you know, these anecdotal kind of experiences have shaped us. And I think some things that a lot of people in our community don't understand is how these can affect us over time. I like to think of a person's like tolerance to these things as like a big rock. A few semi-suggestive remarks isn't gonna break you. You're a pretty strong rock. But hearing somebody say the N-word, making fun of your hair, repeatedly asking where you're really from, I mean, you can handle it. But going in day after day after day, you're putting cracks in your metaphorical rock, okay? And pretty soon, you're gonna crumble, okay? And I think that's what me and a lot of other people on this panel have experienced, is just the constant barrage of, you know, these tiny things that overall break us down and wear us down. And I think that's what a lot of adults need to understand, whether that be adults in the community or adults in the classroom, just making sure that these small things get put to an end so that they don't lead to somebody's eventual crumbling.
I am just so tired. I'm very tired of living in this town for the same exact reason that Max has. It's just the small things that slowly pick at you until you just can't handle it anymore. And I'm at a point where there's no consideration that I'm gonna stay in the state of Oregon after I graduate. There's not a single doubt in my mind that I belong somewhere else, and this is not my home. And how, like, that's awful. That's terrible. Like, this is a beautiful state with beautiful people, but how did I get to feel this way? How did I get to feel this way? And how can you change that? And I think the biggest thing that people in the audience need to realize is that it starts with the kids that say stuff to me, and they all learn it from somewhere. They learn it from the houses that they grow up in, and they learn it from the parents who thinks that things are okay when they're really not. And they learn it from this community. It's everywhere. It's in everything that is taught, everything that is just said. Kids are sponges. They absorb all information and take that in, and that becomes their character. So I guess for some concrete thing that the school could do is just, this isn't just some box you can check. Like, it's very clear to this community that there's something that needs to be done about it, and that there's a large group of people, mostly in this room, who would like some sort of change. But it's not a box, and you can create whatever councils and you can do whatever you want that looks like you're doing something, but you have to utilize those resources in order for you to succeed. And it has to matter to you. You have to feel it. It's not something that's surface level. This is personal. This is so personal to me, and it's personal to pretty much everyone on this panel. And I think just need to care. Because there's a whole lot of not caring going on. And education is incredibly important for the student body, but if we're going to get anywhere, then the school board and the administration, it's not simple. This problem isn't just going to go away, and it's not going to take a year, it's not going to take 2 years, it's going to take forever. And that's just something that I think people in higher up need to understand, because these problems are going to stay with me for the rest of my life, and they're going to stay with other people for the rest of their lives. And that's something that you should consider when approaching creating any sort of rules, any sort of policy, that it's going to affect, anything you do is going to affect people of color, people in minority positions. And you need to utilize, you can't be an all-white board creating some policy involving people of minority. You have to have people who know about it, people who have these experiences, because you'll never create a policy or anything that's going to be half as good as what people who have those techniques and experiences can go through. And so that's just what I have to say about that. One other, I just wanted to read, there's this girl who was unable to attend, her name is Lucy Adams, and I felt that she had said something that was very good, so I'm going to read it. It's cool to come to these meetings and sit and listen, but you have to understand that real change has never happened without the group in power making sacrifices. For white people, this is uncomfortable because we're used to the things being catered to us. But you have to use your platform as a white person to cede power to people who have been denied it in the past. One concrete thing that you can change is the amount of diversity in staff. If you have children or grandchildren in the Lake Oswego School District, you have so much power. Call in, send emails, be a pain in the ass for equity issues in the same way that you are for less important things. It might be uncomfortable and you might irritate some people, but we have to shoulder some of this burden rather than just sitting back and watching people of color twist themselves into knots and to get things done. So.
So I also have a prepared statement, so don't mind me from looking down. I just want to make sure that I say everything that I want to say. So when it comes to racism in schools, it's important for adults to be aware of that racist behavior is prevalent, and there's no denying that fact. And varying experiences should not undermine the perspectives of students that feel uncomfortable, unsafe, or targeted, and even if their experience heavily contrasts with the vast majority of students. Because the vast majority of students at our schools are white, and thus their experiences will likely coincide with the comfort of being white in Lake Oswego. So if Lake Oswego is going to continue to pride itself in being this renowned school district or this wonderful community, then it's essential that we don't dismiss any one experience or any one student that may indicate that there's a difference in their treatment or their opportunities or their comfort levels of any background, of any race. And for adults, specifically those that administer our buildings and in our school district, it's essential that there is an emphasis on continuous and active efforts. Students may not come forward and explicitly say that there's a problem, and some students may adamantly deny that there is a problem in the first place, but when people like us come forward and talk about our experiences, it's important to recognize that we are trying to illustrate that there's a much larger problem that one of us just can't illustrate. So when we come together, we're trying to tell you and to convey to the community that behind us there's a larger and more complicated and intricate problem, and that we want you all to be a part of.
So I think, okay, to finish up, I think that the community needs to take into account what the students say. If there's a body of students who repeatedly ask for change because of the harmful comments or an unsupportive environment, then the community needs to take it seriously. There wouldn't be so much of a fight if there isn't a problem. And every day, the issue of creating a level platform where people, black or white, can have voiced their opinions and be able to share these things to each other, it's so important, and it needs to be a part of our society and in every part of our society, including the educational environment. We need to be able to put things into the educational system that aren't there already, which includes education in the history of
racism and slavery, and we need to make sure that all English departments have some have some way of explaining and doubling down on what it means to really what it means to have a history in an oppressed race, or someone who isn't able to say have their voice like the privileged white person would. And I think that people use their definition of being in this bubble. The white people in this community, they tend to use it as a definition to perpetuate these racist and biased norms, and like they'll think, oh, I'll get out of Lake Oswego. These students think, oh, I'll get out of Lake Oswego and it won't apply to me anymore. But the thing is, that's not the right mindset. Students need to realize that this can't be put off into the point where it's not in their hands anymore, to the point where they'll just go to another place and they'll say, oh, forget about it, because this isn't me anymore. I don't need to be associated with it. Right now, it's in our hands, and we need to make that change.
So in my culture, the majority of people in my culture wear a steel bracelet, and I'm wearing mine right now. It's really small, so you might not be able to see it. But what it is meant to symbolize is that every day, both our minds and our hands should be dedicated to doing good work. And what essentially that's meant to me is that if we see something that's wrong, it's not enough to just believe it's wrong. We must also act upon what we see is wrong. And there's a boy on my bus, and for the sake of identity, we're gonna call him Sam. And Sam really liked to use the N-word a lot in every circumstance. So he'd repeatedly use it, and everyone on my bus would look uncomfortable because it's something that we all have at this point understood is wrong. But I would always be the one that'd be like, hey, Sam, why don't we not use that word? And after 9 or 10 times, Sam sat next to me on the bus, and he was like, hey, why'd you keep telling me not to use the N-word? So I explained it all to him, and I was like, there's a racial identity, there's not a use to using this. And he looked really thoughtful, and he kind of like left. And I was like, okay, at least I did my part. He listened. And then 2 months later, he ran on the bus, and he sat next to me, and he was like, Anushka, Anushka. And I was like, what? And he was like, I told someone they couldn't use the N-word today. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, you know, what you explained to me make a lot of sense, so I told like everybody. And that made every single hair comment, every single you could not be the president, every single of the hundreds of times things have happened to me and people around me worth it in that 1 second. Because this boy, Sam, has never used the N-word since. And my parents, from my birth, have taught me to be that person to stand up. My mom used to take my baby carrier to meetings about racism. And my dad, during Applebee's, lunches, will pull up something around race and say, this is not okay. And we do not stand for this. But most of the time when racist incidences happen in LO, you'll have kids coming up to you after the fact and going, hey, that was really wrong. And that's great, but it's like giving me a coupon after the expiration date. It's nice, but it's not really gonna help me. And what we need to do as a community is we need to teach our kids to spend those coupons the moment where the emotional cost is the most. We need to teach our kids to stand there and say, hey, you can't use the N-word, or hey, that girl can have her hair straight, or she can be president, or just stop saying something racist. And when we have kids like that are willing to stand up and not just look uncomfortable, we change the narrative of who we are. And one of those people is standing right there, Mr. Ron Wagner, who isn't a student, but has stood up in this community. He was one of the inaugural, can we get a round of applause for him real quick? He was one of the inaugural people to push for us having our district diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. And he doesn't know how much that means to me, but he was one of the first people to say, hey, this is wrong. And maybe it didn't personally affect him, I'm not exactly sure, but he was willing to say that's wrong. And so from the perspective of me, I don't believe the next generation is our students. I believe the next generation is our adults. I believe it's you. I believe it's our educators. I believe it's our parents that have to stand up in the middle of dinner and say, hey, that on the news saying that that kid wearing a turban is a terrorist, that's not right. Or what you just said is a little racist. Let's work together to see another way we can say this. And when we teach our students to not only believe what's wrong, but also act on it, we can all be wearing our karas, maybe not in hand, but in heart.
So, yeah, can we get another round of applause for these students, please?